Hi, I'm Farak Masood. I went to the Cavan School of Mines. I represent Oberon Solutions Australia. At Oberon, we offer a full 360-degree, sector-specific answer to all your contractor management, recruitment, HR, payroll, governance and legislative issues. Let Oberon Solutions Australia take the pain away so you can focus on the projects that will move your business forward. Search Oberon Solutions Australia.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mike Grady and I'm part of the Hatch Digital team here in Brisbane. I have the pleasure today of presenting to you on a recently released research report that Hatch has done on capital projects in the mining industry in Australia. The report is entitled The Digital Drift, and in the report we look at, the adoption and the maturity of digital and its use on capital projects for new build developments of mines. Our target in terms of audience for this was to look at the owner-operator community and constructors, but what we'll do first is just talk a little bit through the way the research was constructed. So if we look out at the moment in terms of media reports, available information, it talks to, a limited amount of adoption of digital into the construction, mining industries, etc. And our hypothesis was that was potentially a little bit unfair. So we thought, what's the best way of trying to understand what is the current level of digital maturity or digital adoption, and specifically with regards to how projects are executed as opposed to how facilities are operated. And the answer that we kind of settled on was that we would engage through primary research a number of industry leaders, targeting group heads of project teams, but also looking at kind of constructors and other members of that broader ecosystem that deliver projects to try and get some insights in terms of, was there standardization, was there not? Was there a greater level of adoption than had been reported previously, or was there not? And through that, what we're going to present in the following few slides is the insights that came out of those discussions or those interviews and that primary research, and then actually look to kind of finish off with some recommendations that we provided based on our analysis of the results and the findings and the discussions that we've had with people. And so hopefully what this does is it provides a really interesting and unique insight into what is the current level of digital adoption on projects. And ultimately, the correlation with that is then how much of that value is being achieved through the use of digital into projects. So that's the context and the background as we kind of kick this off. So we kind of tried to bring it together. I mean, there were a large number of insights, as it said on the previous slide. We spoke to 18 representatives across a broad range of companies, both in terms of size and scale and focus. And really what we kind of thought we'd settle on is trying to bring those back together into kind of common themes rather than trying to kind of pick out each one. So we'll quickly just touch on these now, but we'll go into a little bit more depth on the following slides. And in those, we'll present some of the insights into the actual specific questions that we asked. And of course, all of the research is now available through the research report, which has been published on hatch.com. So publicly available, free to access, etc. So I think probably the first and the main one was that digital innovation is still in its infancy. So in answer to the question, is there a large level of maturity? I think we found that that was varied across the board. The other thing that perhaps runs parallel with that is that based on the responses that we received, there appeared to be a lack of standardization, both in terms of the way terms were applied, even the definition and the meaning of digital, but certainly in terms of the way that processes were being developed and projects were being executed. The other one, and I guess this is maybe not such a shock, is that we saw, a belief that said traditional tendencies still seem to be the default mechanism. A number of respondents that we spoke to talked about the way that you kind of set up a project or you develop an execution plan is through picking up what had been done previously, maybe refining it slightly, but generally following a similar kind of theme. So in itself, we'll touch on that later in terms of whether that's a barrier to change with regards to the adoption of digital. But what was pleasing, I guess, was that a common theme that came out was the emphasis on people over technology. So as we saw, while technology might seem to be able to solve problems, there was a strong belief from the respondents that the people element was the key element that they wanted to focus on, or that they believed by focusing on, you're able to deliver greater value through that. And I guess probably the most pleasing result is that there was generally across the group that we spoke to a very positive attitude towards digital innovation. And so therefore, based on that, we think that the pathway or the runway that is there to kind of drive that improvement. However, of course, there are still a few barriers. And I guess the way we looked at, there's structural industry barriers that need to overcome. There's the cultural barriers in terms of the project proponents and the way that the ecosystem is set up. And then ultimately, with regards to digital specifically, there is potentially a knowledge barrier. So understanding what digital can deliver in terms of benefits was kind of a key theme that came through this. So what we'll do now is we'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but we'll touch on more of the results as opposed to the themes themselves. So in the first one, I guess looking at the two graphs that we've presented here, the first one was we asked organisations, if you are going to go after a holistic approach to driving digital and driving improvements on your project, arguably the first step that you would do would be to look to put in place a strategy. So what are the kind of the drivers? How are we going to change? How are we going to create those relationships and interaction between project participants? And yet in the group that we spoke to, almost 3/4 or 72% of people said that they had no digital strategy. And another 11% said that they had a documented strategy, but it wasn't largely being embraced. So it was only 17% of the people that had a strategy and were executing against that. So I guess that fed through to, I guess, some of the descriptions from people that talked to the ad hoc nature. Adopt and adapt was a term that was used multiple times to kind of talk to how technology and how digital was being adopted on projects. So probably an interesting one there is around maybe an opportunity to be more strategic and more holistic with regards to how to change and how to drive improvement, to look at how you can then better improve the way you're delivering your projects. The other one was we looked at the project management methodology itself, I guess accepting that most large organisations have a methodology that sets out how things are going to be done and the structure and the kind of the guidance notes, et cetera, et cetera. And we asked the question, had that been updated for new digital technologies or new digital ways of working? And again, similarly there, you can see that about 1/4 or 28% hadn't updated that document. 61% said it was in progress. And I guess within that, for context, a number of people described it as a live document, so it was continually being updated. But again, it was in progress. It hadn't fully been brought into the digital age. And only 11% said that they had fully updated it to incorporate digital. So again, interesting findings there, but I think it shows, I guess, that we were talking about at the start, that digital is in its infancy and it is an evolving area, but one arguably that it has the potential to deliver a lot of value. If we look at the second one, sorry, just moving something. We looked at kind of just to try and get an understanding of whether there was any variance across how the groups were set up. So we kind of asked around, are you regionally centralized or commodity focused? And I guess if we kind of level that out, it's about 1/3 in each of those buckets. So we didn't see any consistency in terms of how those groups were set up, and arguably potentially that's something that could be investigated further to look at if, you know, a more commodity focused way of operating might drive some improvements, or whether that centralized function might actually create more standardization in the way projects are delivered and therefore deliver better results. But it would appear based on that sample that the industry hasn't settled on one model being better than the other, with each model kind of being used across the various organizations. The other one, which we tried to, I guess, move to more towards a digital, which would arguably be a data-centric way of delivering, and maybe it's an extension to the previous question around project management methodologies, was to ask people, had you moved to a data-centric way of working, or were you still, I guess, ostensibly document-centric in the way that you executed projects? And again, give or take, we can see about half and half there, 53% for document, 47% for data-centric. So arguably still some way to go there with regards to moving towards a more data-centric way of working, which we would argue is the precursor to creating that foundation for being more digital and getting the benefits from digital as you move into operations. You need to start embracing that data-centric way of executing and starting to value that data beyond, I guess, a more document-centric way of working. Sorry. So the next one we were really, I guess this goes back to, if you look at a lot of the report or the evidence and the data coming out of the OECD and other reports from McKinsey, etc., they talk to kind of the productivity in the construction and the mining industries as being fairly flat, and that I guess the productivity in the in the manufacturing industry and other industries having increased by a more significant amount. So we tried to look at, has there been any impetus to kind of try and drive that change in terms of changing the way projects are executed? We asked, the actual question we asked was, have you adopted any innovative approaches with the way that you deliver your projects? And interestingly, we put a bit of a quote in there. One respondent kind of said, we've tried everything. Is that innovative in itself? But I guess maybe not, right? But what we saw was most people listed approaches that would fall in line with the traditional approaches. And when we talked to benchmarking, I guess most people kind of said that, yes, they do benchmark, but they use it as a guide to understand whether they're in the right ballpark. And only one respondent that we spoke to said, we set a benchmark and then we set a line 15 to 20% below it. And that's where we should be trying to achieve, because we should be beating everything that we've done in the past. And I guess, again, so that opened up the question in our mind as to, do we need to maybe look at things a little bit differently, take that step back, and then actually really try and understand what in the current traditional model can be improved and should be improved, or arguably should be reduced or removed, so that we can make a bit of a step change in terms of improvement in the way that we deliver projects. So bear with me. The next one is, we looked at the starting to move into kind of the digital themes here. So moving into technology, moving into analytics. And so the questions we asked were around, have you started to develop more complex kind of metrics or KPIs? So are you starting to use analytics or mathematical methods to try and drive insights in terms of how your project is performing? Are you starting to use forecasting based on kind of generating models that will look at a broader set of data and bring it together? And again, interestingly, 61% of people said no, they weren't adopting it. They were using the pretty traditional project controls measures to understand performance on their project. But there is, again, as a kind of a common theme here, there is an emergence, right? So 17% are investigating, 22% have project instances where it is being deployed, but we didn't find any respondents in the group that we spoke to that said that it had been applied completely across the board. So interesting, and maybe a big opportunity area there as you start moving towards a more data-centric way of delivering. You can actually start using that data to start driving greater insights. The next one we touched on was really just to kind of cover off that systems question. And so we kind of asked it in two parts. So we've got question 1A and question 1B. Question 1A was, do you have an enterprise set of project delivery systems? Meaning you've got a standard set of systems that you would use to execute your projects. Or do you have project instances of systems, or do you allow projects to make decisions around systems? And again, 79, or almost 4/5 there, 80% said they're project specific, and only 21% said they were enterprise. And I guess in that, a number of people who described their enterprise systems were talking about SAP as being the kind of the core finance system, as opposed to the more transactional project delivery focused system. So that is interesting in itself, because arguably, I guess, if you put a view that says a standard way of delivering and a familiarity with systems, etc., might drive some improvement, it seemed to be still an ability to kind of flex that or change that on a project by project basis. The other one was, we were trying to look, I guess, across that, the levels of the ecosystem from kind of the owner down, in terms of the owners that we asked, was there a set of systems that covered the execution of suppliers? Were you mandating systems? Were you mandating system configurations? And what you can see there, again, is only a small percentage, i.e. 8%, said that they were mandating down the systems that covered suppliers. And the vast majority still see it as being the suppliers are responsible for bringing their systems, and will leave that kind of in their remit. So again, is that driving improvement? Is it driving the visibility necessary to be able to understand how project performance can be first analysed and therewith improved? So some interesting results there we found with regards to the kind of the adoption of analytics and digital, and then with regards to the standardisation and the definition in the system space. Pardon me, oops, sorry. The next one we touched on was really just to look at kind of that kind of positive attitude towards digital, but also around how the organisations were set up, and kind of continuing on that theme around traditional approaches and systems. So the question we asked here was, does your organisation have a dedicated digital team that supports your project function, or do you receive technology or digital support from a centralised, maybe information technology or IT function? And what you can see there is that, again, only about a quarter, or 22%, had a dedicated function that was supporting projects, and most people were getting support from that centralized group within their organization. So again, I guess that to me opens up the follow-on question around, is there some potential nuances or some benefit from having people who are specialized in the systems which are required to deliver projects? Or is it acceptable, I guess, to have that kind of central digital function? The next one was we tried to look at, I guess, extending that data-centric versus document-centric view. We took that down into the processes and the information and data requirements. And in terms of the question that we asked was, have you moved into that process world, and is it codified and is it understood, or is it still kind of captured within the documents? And again, my apologies here. I believe I'm one of the first live sessions today, but I've inadvertently pasted the wrong graph in there. But what you can see is that it's a similar result. About half and half believe that they had moved to well-defined processes and moved into kind of the codified world and away from the documents. So what we'll do is we'll quickly finish off the last item, and then we'll move into the recommendations. So really, just to quickly touch off, we kind of saw barriers breaking down into three areas. There's obviously the structural barriers. The industry, the capital project industry, is very fragmented, and so that in itself creates barriers and the ability to drive things across the whole. Of course, there's the cultural barriers, as we touched on. There's traditional tendencies and I guess a broader cultural resistance to some of these changes that need to be overcome to really drive that agenda further. And obviously on the knowledge barriers, there's a lot of new technology that's out there and a really deep need to understand that. So obviously there is a question around who in the organisation or who in making decisions on projects, how are they getting that deep understanding that to actually inform those decisions? So what we'll now do is I'll just quickly cover off. I want to kind of just touch on the 9 recommendations that we came out, and I appreciate 9 recommendations might seem like a lot to go after, but we tried to break them down into 3 areas. So the first one was around leadership, vision and strategy. The second one was around people and culture. And the third one was to focus on that technology foundation. And so the first one, take ownership of digital innovation. I mean, the journey to digital needs the impetus of the whole industry. And so we saw, there needs to be that kind of collective commitment to digital for it to really be adopted and more kind of embraced across the projects. And so that's a commitment that needs to be done from the whole industry, not just from parts within the industry, or not relying on suppliers or pointing the finger at other parties, etc. And then through that, I guess we extend into the second recommendation, which is you really need to create that digital ecosystem. And by creating that digital ecosystem, or that kind of collaboration that can drive that improvement, that's when we'll start to see real changes. And I think what we talk to and what we'll touch on here is that really needs to happen from day one. It's not something that can happen late in the project, or it's not something that can happen on each of the parts. And then really to kind of bring all that together, what we think is you need to start using that data to establish those new benchmarks for capital productivity, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, to use that old adage. And so really they tie together around that leadership, vision and strategy and putting those in place. But then as we look at people and culture, I think we've got these 3 recommendations here, which is you need to accept the limits of your own knowledge. If you don't know something, find people who can provide you with an insight, because to really drive improvement, I think you need to get to a level of detail and understanding to basically make some more informed decisions to make some change. Again, picking up on a similar theme here, it's that collaboration across the teams, across the organizations, across the industry that's going to drive it. And then really by doing that, you need to invest in that proper change management, making sure that everyone's on the same page, making sure that everyone's understanding what you're driving to and what that new looks like. And then that's how you drive improvement. And just the last one quickly, focus on those data, use that data, drive that structure, drive that improvement. So look, quickly wrap it all up, but I think hopefully across those 3 pillars of success and the insights that we provided for, again, all captured in the overall report, there's hopefully some good insights there, and look, happy to talk further with people about how they can drive that improvement. So thank you all very much for listening today. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to talking to people further in the future. Thank you and goodbye.
Hi, I'm Farak Masood. I went to the Capital School of Mines. I represent Oberon Solutions Australia. At Oberon, we offer a full 360-degree, sector-specific answer to all your contractor management, recruitment, HR, payroll, governance and legislative issues. Let Oberon Solutions Australia take the pain away. so you can focus on the projects that will move your business forward. Search Oberon Solutions Australia.